We couldn't cover this week without a full account of the All-Star game. It was in Boston Garden, one of the oldest rinks going. If you had ever been there, and I'm ashamed to admit, I never saw a game there, but from all the accounts I wrote, it was a unique experience, to say the least. Rats as big as house cats were around. It was quite a place. It was also an interesting place for this year's All-Star game, in which the home team, the East, was upset by the upstart Western Division by a score of 2-1. And you have to ask yourself, 50 years later, what the hell kind of score was that for a National Hockey League All-Star game when you look at the whatever you want to call these matches are today? They don't even do it the way they used to. The game was an upset, but the reason the West won was mainly due to the contributions of some Chicago Blackhawks players. Remember, the Blackhawks were now in the Western Division, and they actually formed the bulk of the nucleus of that team. Dan Proudfoot of the Toronto Globe and Mail filed a very good report, and it forms the basis of what we have to say here. We'll also have some stuff from Pat Curran of the Montreal Gazette, who had a few opinions as well on the contest. Dan begins that the All-Stars of the National Hockey League's Western Division beat the better-known Eastern opponents 2-1, proving Coach Scotty Bowman's contention that the addition of a few guys named Hull can make a hull of a difference. Chico Mackey and Bobby Hull, both Chicago Blackhawks, scored for the West, with Yvon Cournoyer being the only Eastern Division marksman. Bowman, he's now the general manager of the St. Louis Blues, was behind the bench of the winner for the first time in 12 Stanley Cup finals and 3 All-Star appearances. In previous East-West All-Star games, the teams tied in 1969, and the East won 4-1 last year. This year, however, Chicago moved from the Eastern Division to the Western Division, and 8 of the 20 Western Division players usually wore the livery of the Chicago Blackhawks. And of course, as Bowman predicted quite readily, that made a drastic difference. What a way to go, he said afterwards. The Chicago players made the difference in this game. Bowman pointed to Bobby Hull, a biceps bulging and his best winning smile in evidence, and singled him out as the individual who inspired the win. Hull told Proudfoot, "This game was a little different for me. It does mean something playing for the underdog. It makes it just a little nicer." Hull went on to say that this was likely the lightest checking of all the All-Star games. Of course, you have to. It's a pretty potent punch we were facing. It was light checking, but it certainly didn't improve the offense, did it? Hull did amend his statement, however, when he was asked about hitting in the game. The extreme gentleness of the action had many of the 14,994 fans yelling for some kind of show of muscle, or at least a little bit of antagonism. Hull said, "I would say perhaps there wasn't as much hitting as in other games, all right." Keith Magnuson, a fellow Blackhawk, put it a little more clearly. "You don't want to really hurt anybody. It's the All-Star game." Magnuson, of course, was one of the few players who did dish out the odd body check. And if you know Magnuson, you know that's the only way he knows how to play the game. But he said, not as much as in a usual game where you want to leave guys sitting in the corner. Another thing Magnuson said was that it's harder to hit guys who always have their heads up. What he's referring to there, of course, is that 80% of the National Hockey League players are not the elite players, and they have a tendency to skate around the rink with their heads down. Those are the game guys that Magnuson loves to line up and lay the body on. The West took a 2-0 lead in the first 5 minutes of this game, and it looked like it might end up being an 11-0 whitewash. Ed Jockman said he experienced what he calls his all-star jinx. Chico Mackey scored at only 36 seconds with the first shot of the game that hit a net. He shot between defensemen Brad Park and Bobby Orr. What a defense tandem that is. Can you imagine those two guys on the same team? He said he eased to the right. The two moved with him. "I didn't really expect him to shoot," said Jockman. I just wasn't ready for it. Ed, who's played in several All-Star games, says, this happens every year. Last year, Dean Prentice scored on me in the first shot. This year, or the year before, I should say, in Montreal, Jockerman says he doesn't remember exactly, but somebody scored with the first shot in that game when he came in for the last half of the period. Eddie Jockerman did say that he doesn't have any similar troubles in regular games. He's not prone to giving up early goals, and if you watch Eddie, you know that he's telling the truth. Ed said the only consolation about tonight is that it didn't cost 2 points. It took some money out of our pockets, and then I thought the guys in our team, they might have bailed me out by scoring more goals. They certainly had the firepower to do so, but inexplicably in this game, only 3 goals were scored. The winners each earned $500, and the losers got $250. The only conclusion is that the prize money has to be raised by the league because many of the players in this game just didn't seem to care about winning or losing. There was literally in this game nothing on the line. As they now start to monkey around with the divisions, moving teams around like Chicago, putting Vancouver in the East, the players have no real allegiance to their division. There's nothing that they really want to get. And a paltry $500 for a hockey player in 1970, that's chump change. But let's not say that all the players were of the opinion that the game meant nothing. Both Hulls, Bobby and Dennis, were among those players who did care. The elder Hull scored the winning goal when he took Bill Flett's rebound and he slapped it past Jockerman from just off the corner of the net. Proudfoot describes the game quite aptly, however, when he says most of this contest was about as exciting as a marble tournament with the best shooters. The Boston fan seemed confused with no obvious stars or villains for whom they should cheer or boo. The starting lineup included the Bruins' Phil Esposito, Ken Hodge, Johnny Busick, Bobby Orr, and Ed Westfall, and Dallas Smith, of course, appeared in the game a little later. Still, the fans, they had mixed emotions. Chicago's Keith Magnuson, who is disliked with enthusiasm in Boston Garden, echoed with the cheers when he was tripped by Gordie Howe, who drew no penalty on the play. One fan was heard to shout, "God forgive me, I'm cheering for Gordie Howe." And it was a bit strange to be in Boston Garden and find that the loudest and most prolonged applause of the evening came when Gordie Howe's turn came to be introduced in the pregame ceremonies. Now, once Jockerman settled down, the show belonged to the goalkeepers, Jockerman and Tony Esposito, and in the final 20 minutes or 30 minutes, Gilles Villemure and Ernie Wakely. That's right. Both New York Ranger goalkeepers were named to the All-Star team, and they split the duties, each playing 30 minutes. And just to show you how little work both Wakely and Villemure had, in the third period, the West outshot the East 7-2. All that firepower on the Eastern Division, and they had 2 shots at Ernie Wakely. Harry Sinden, the retired coach of the Boston Bruins, returned for one night to coach the Eastern Division, which is the custom as he was the Stanley Cup winning coach the season before. Well, Harry was behind the bench extolling his players with vigorous hand clapping behind the bench. Of course, it didn't seem to motivate them. Gordie Howe turned to Sinden and said, "If you can't win with these guys, you really should stay retired." Now, if this had been a baseball game, the Boston fans might have liked it because it truly was a no-hitter. But they didn't seem to like it, and in fact, the fans at Boston Gardens were leaving early. Much before the end of this game, there just wasn't much for them to see. The most appreciative customers on the circuit reacted in true Boston style when the players on the two teams were introduced before the face-off. They accorded standing ovations to Bobby Hull, Gordie Howe, and of course a lot of people felt there was something extra about Bobby Orr and the rest of the Bruins. Even Joe Murphy, the popular wisecracker from the Boston press box, he couldn't restrain himself. He was the guy who said, "God forgive me, I'm rooting for Howe." Murphy also said that he liked J.C. Tremblay, and he was glad that he was on the Eastern Division side too. You get the feeling that some of these people, the partisan fans, they do like players on other team, and they did enjoy the chance to root for them for once without feeling particularly guilty. Jack Barry of the Detroit Free Press was on hand, of course, as most writers were from around the NHL, and he had some good insight into the game, and Jack Barry's had enough to deal with this year anyway. But he made some comments as well. He writes that it was after the NHL's 24th All-Star Game, a writer jokingly asked Minnesota General Manager Ren Blair if the game had been played under international rules. But Blair replied, nope, it was played under Players Association rules, which gives you an insight into what management really thinks of the NHLPA. Blair then laughed and said, we've had about 45 of those kind of games this season. Blair, of course, was talking about his North Stars. He should be happy it's only 45. By season's end, we'll be close to 78 locally, and that's the entire schedule. When the body is taken out of hockey, it's like a tree without leaves. Barry says that unfortunately you can't expect a hockey all-star game to be much different than that. However, no one, you see, wants to get hurt in a game that means absolutely nothing in the standings and puts very little money in the pockets of the players, and the players all readily admit that. Barry says that the hockey all-star game is most likely the dullest of all those of the major sports all-star contests because of the one essential ingredient to hockey, body checking, is non-existent in these games. They might not bump as much under the boards in basketball all-star games, but you know that each team is going to score 100 points or so anyway. That's just the way the basketball all-star game is. In football, they throw a lot of passes in the Pro Bowl, and that excites the fans. Passing is really what brings fans to their feet in football. And baseball's all-star game pits the sport's best hitters against the best pitchers in dramatic one-on-one situations. There's no beanballs thrown in baseball, but the baseball all-star game, I always felt, was the best of the games, the all-star game.